My wedding was starting in exactly 8 hours. The flowers were arranged. The caterer was set up. My bridesmaids were laughing over mimosas in the next room. And I was standing in my bridal suite, completely frozen, staring at the one thing that was supposed to make this day feel like a dream. My custom, hand-stitched $5,000 wedding gown, soaked in red wine from the neckline all the way down to the hem. And standing right there, holding the empty wine glass, was my future mother-in-law. She looked at me with those pale, unreadable eyes and said, "Oh, sweetheart." It just slipped. It didn't slip. Nothing about that woman ever just slipped. And before that day was over, everyone in that room, everyone at that wedding would know exactly who she really was. Let me take you back, because to understand what happened that morning, you have to understand the years that came before it. My name is not important. What matters is that I spent 4 years trying to be the daughter-in-law that women wanted me to be, and it was never, ever enough. When Marcus and I first started dating, his mother, Diane, was perfectly pleasant. She smiled at the right times, complimented my hair once, and told Marcus he seemed happy. I thought, okay, this could work. I was 26 years old and in love, and I genuinely believed that if I was kind enough, patient enough, and accommodating enough, Diane would eventually come around and accept me. What I didn't understand yet was that Diane didn't want to come around. She wanted to remain the most important woman in her son's life, and I was a threat to that, not because I was difficult, but simply because I existed. The passive aggression started small. Comments about how I cooked. Observations about my apartment that were technically compliments but felt like little paper cuts. She'd say things like, "Marcus always preferred a tidier space," or "His ex used to make his grandmother's recipe. I could teach you if you'd like." I smiled through every single one. Marcus noticed some of it, and to his credit, he'd gently push back. But Diane was skilled. She'd immediately soften, claim she meant no harm, and then look at me with that same unreadable expression, like she was cataloging my reaction for future use. When Marcus proposed on a hiking trail at sunset, with a ring he'd saved quietly for almost a year, I cried. And then, 2 days later, Diane called to say she was so happy for us, in a tone that made my skin crawl. Within a week, she had opinions about the venue, the date, the guest list, the flowers, and the dress. Especially the dress. She kept forwarding me links to gowns she liked, all of them modest to the point of being plain, all of them nothing like what I had in mind. I thanked her politely every time, and then quietly went and commissioned the dress I actually wanted from a designer I had followed for years. It was structured, elegant, with delicate embroidery along the bodice and a cathedral train that made me feel, for the first time in my life, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I never showed Diane. The wedding was planned for a Saturday in early June at a restored estate about 40 minutes outside the city. The estate had a small number of overnight rooms, and they were reserved for the wedding party and immediate family. Marcus and I had made a deliberate decision, and I want to be clear that Marcus made this decision alongside me, not at my insistence, that Diane would not be staying on the property overnight. She lived 35 minutes away. She had a perfectly good home. The decision was made partly for logistics and partly because I knew in my gut that having her in the building the night before would be a mistake. Marcus agreed. He told his mother directly, calmly, and with genuine kindness. She told him she understood. She did not understand. She was furious. We know she was furious because she told his Aunt Linda, who told his cousin Rachel, who told Marcus's sister Becca, who was one of my bridesmaids and one of the most genuinely good people I have ever met. Becca came to me about a month before the wedding and said, "I love my mother, but you need to know she's been telling people she's been disrespected." I thanked Becca. Marcus called his mother and had what he described as a firm conversation. Diane went quiet. That silence, I would later understand, was not acceptance. It was strategy. The morning of the wedding, I was up before 6. I hadn't slept well, not because I was nervous about Marcus, but because my body seemed to understand that something was coming. I put on my robe, ordered room service coffee for the suite, and started the morning I had planned for months. My bridesmaids arrived by 7. My makeup artist set up by 7:30. My mother was there, already emotional, already clutching a handkerchief. The dress was hanging in its garment bag on the back of the closet door, and every time I looked at it, something warm moved through my chest. Diane arrived at the estate at 8:45 in the morning. She was not supposed to be there until noon, when the ceremony guests would begin arriving. The estate coordinator told me later that Diane had called ahead and said she was Marcus's mother and needed to drop something off. They let her through. She came directly to the bridal suite. She knocked, and because my mother answered the door and assumed it was fine, because why would it not be fine, Diane walked in. She was dressed beautifully, hair done, jewelry on, full makeup. She looked like she was already ready for the ceremony. She had a bottle of champagne in one hand and 2 glasses in the other, and she was smiling the smile I had spent 4 years learning to distrust. She said she wanted to share a private moment with me before the day began. My bridesmaids exchanged glances. My mother, bless her, started to say something, but I told everyone it was okay and let Diane stay for a few minutes because I was trying, even then, to extend a hand. She poured the champagne. She toasted to Marcus. She toasted to the future. She walked around the suite complimenting things, the flowers, the lighting, the little details my bridesmaids and I had worked on for months. And then she walked toward the closet where my dress was hanging. She said, "Can I see it? I've been so curious." Something in me wanted to say no, but I opened the garment bag. I showed her the dress. What happened next took less than 3 seconds. Diane's glass, still holding a significant amount of champagne that had somehow transformed into what I can only describe as deeply red, which is when I realized she had switched to the open bottle of red wine sitting on the side table, tilted forward. The wine came out in a single, decisive pour, straight down the front of my dress. And then she looked at me and said, "Oh, sweetheart, it just slipped." I did not scream. I want you to understand that, because I think people expect that moment to break a person. For a few seconds, I just stood there, looking at my ruined dress, and something shifted in me. Something quieter. Something that had been building for 4 years and had finally found its shape. I looked at Diane, and I said, very calmly, "Please leave this room." She started to apologize again. I said it again, "Please leave this room right now." And she left. The next 30 seconds were chaos. My bridesmaids crowded around the dress. My mother was on the phone with someone. My maid of honor, Priya, was already Googling emergency solutions. And I was standing in the middle of it all, thinking about one thing. I needed to call Marcus. He answered on the first ring. I told him, in the flattest voice I have ever used, exactly what had happened. There was a silence on his end that lasted long enough that I thought the call had dropped. And then Marcus said, "I'm coming to you right now." He was there in 4 minutes. He looked at the dress. He looked at me. He asked me once, quietly, if I believed it was an accident. He kissed my forehead. And then he walked out of the suite to find his mother. I want to tell you about Priya because she is the reason I had a dress to wear. Priya had been my best friend since college, and she had, at some point in the previous hour, done something extraordinary. She had called every bridal boutique within a 40-minute radius. She had described my measurements. She had sent photos of my original dress for reference. And she had found a boutique, a small family-owned shop that happened to have a sample gown in nearly my size that was genuinely beautiful. It was simpler than my original. Less embroidery, no cathedral train. But it was elegant, and it was white, and when Priya showed me the photo on her phone, I made a decision in about 15 seconds. She drove to pick it up herself while my makeup artist kept working. Marcus found Diane in the estate's garden, pretending to admire the flower arrangements. He told me later what was said, and I believe him completely because I know who he is. He told her that he knew it wasn't an accident. He told her that her behavior over the years, the comments, the campaign against me, the deliberate undermining, had been seen, had been noted, and was not forgotten. He told her that she would not be attending the ceremony. Diane cried. She said he was choosing me over his own mother. Marcus told her, with a steadiness I still find remarkable when I think about it, that he wasn't choosing between two people. He was choosing who he wanted to be. He told her a car would take her home and that they would talk when and if he was ready after the honeymoon. I was told she cried loudly enough that 2 of the groundskeepers heard her. I was also told that his Aunt Linda, who had been one of Diane's primary confidants and gossip partners, witnessed the entire exchange from a nearby terrace and said nothing in Diane's defense. Sometimes the audience matters more than the act. Priya returned with the dress 40 minutes before the ceremony. It fit with minor adjustments that my mother, who had, it turned out, spent years doing alterations as a hobby, handled with a travel sewing kit she had packed in her overnight bag. I stood in front of the mirror in that suite, in a dress I had never planned to wear, and I looked at myself for a long moment. And I thought, Diane thought this would break me. She thought that if she took away the dress, she took away the day. She thought I was someone who could be undone by the right amount of damage at the right moment. She had spent 4 years underestimating me. She had mistaken my patience for weakness, my kindness for naivete, my silence for surrender. And on the most important morning of my life, she had made her biggest miscalculation because she had done it in front of witnesses, in a room full of women who loved me, and she had done it to someone who had already decided, years before that morning, that she would not be defined by what other people tried to take from her. The ceremony was at 2 in the afternoon. The sun came through the estate's tall windows in long golden columns. Marcus was standing at the end of the aisle with an expression on his face that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. I walked toward him in a dress that wasn't the one I planned, and it didn't matter. Not even slightly. What Diane did not anticipate, what she could not have anticipated because she had always underestimated the people around her, was that the story was already moving through the family before the first course was served at the reception. Becca had told Rachel. Rachel had told 3 cousins. The estate coordinator, who had seen Diane arrive and had heard the commotion, had quietly mentioned it to Marcus's uncle. By the time the toasts were being made, every single person in that room knew what Diane had done. Not from Marcus, just from the natural, unstoppable movement of truth through a group of people who had, many of them, already had their own quiet suspicions about her for years. At the reception, Marcus's uncle, a quiet, measured man named Gerald, who had always been the family's moral anchor, stood up during the open toast portion and said, without naming names, that he was proud of his nephew for being the kind of man who knew what integrity looked like. The room applauded. Several people looked toward the empty chair that had been reserved for Diane. No one said anything. No one had to. In the weeks that followed the wedding, Diane attempted to reach out. She called Marcus repeatedly. She sent a card. She sent flowers to our new home, which we did not accept. She reached out to Becca and asked her to mediate. Becca, to her enormous credit, told her mother that she would not be used as a messenger and that what she had done was not something that could be resolved with flowers and a card. Diane then made what I can only describe as a strategic error. She began telling people, family members, people from her church, old friends, that the wine had genuinely been an accident, that Marcus had overreacted, and that I had manipulated him into cutting off his own mother. She told this story to enough people that it eventually circled back to us through 3 separate channels. So Marcus and I did something quiet and deliberate. We wrote a single factual account of what had happened. No embellishment, no emotion, just the timeline, the facts, and the names of the witnesses who had been present. We sent it, privately, to the family members Diane had been speaking to. We didn't ask anyone to take sides. We simply made sure that the people hearing her version also had access to ours. Within 2 weeks, the family members who had been sympathetic to Diane went quiet. Two of them reached out to us directly to apologize for having listened to her without asking for our perspective first. Diane's version of events required everyone around her to believe that Marcus, a man they had known his entire life, had inexplicably, without cause, banned his own mother from his wedding and cut her off permanently over a genuine accident. The more she told that story, the less anyone believed it. The truth has a texture that lies don't. People can feel it, even when they can't name it. It has now been almost a year since the wedding. Marcus and I are building something real. A home, a life, a partnership that was tested on its very first official day and held. We have not spoken to Diane. Marcus made that decision himself, not under pressure from me, not as a reaction, but as a deliberate, considered choice about what kind of life he wanted and what kind of people he wanted in it. I think about the woman I was 4 years ago, walking into that family for the first time, so determined to be liked, so willing to absorb every small cruelty, in the hope that patience would eventually be rewarded. I was not wrong to be kind. I was not wrong to try. What I understand now is that kindness and boundaries are not opposites. You can be warm and still be unwilling to be diminished. You can extend grace and still know when grace has reached its limit. Diane thought she was taking something from me that morning. She thought the dress was the point. But the dress was never the point. The point was that she wanted me to feel small, unstable, undone, on the one day when I was supposed to feel the opposite of all of those things. She wanted to remind me that she had power over my happiness. What she discovered, at the cost of her relationship with her son and her standing in her own family, was that she didn't. I wore a different dress. I married the right person. I walked out of that estate in the late afternoon light with my husband's hand in mine, and somewhere across town, Diane was sitting alone with a story that fewer and fewer people were willing to believe. That is what transformation looks like. Not a single dramatic moment of revenge. Not a confrontation with cameras rolling. Just the slow, steady process of someone who was underestimated doing the work, holding her ground, and letting the truth do what truth eventually always does. Find its way into every room that was told a lie. If you've ever had someone in your life who mistook your patience for weakness, who looked at your kindness and decided it meant you could be pushed, then you already know that the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to become what they tried to make you. You don't have to fight loudly. You don't have to perform your strength for anyone. You just have to know who you are, keep building, and trust that the people worth keeping will eventually see exactly what happened. And the people who weren't worth keeping, they'll see it too. They just won't be able to do anything about it anymore.